Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Stephen King Cast, one man's musings on the works of Stephen King. Each week, I will review one entry in the bibliography of Stephen King in the chronological order of publication. And this week, I'm doing something that I wasn't planning on doing. I had planned on sitting down to record a review of episodes 7 and 8 of It, Welcome to Derry, which I will be doing. But before I do that, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the horrible, horrible passing of Rob Reiner. If you had not heard, and I'm not going to get into the details, but unfortunately, the world has lost Rob Reiner, a beloved figure in Hollywood, whose life and career spanned decades. He was a writer, he was an actor, he was a director, he was a philanthropist, he was an activist, he was someone that used his influence to try to make the world a better place. But I'm not here to talk about that. I'm not here to talk about the death. I'm here to talk about his contribution specifically to our shared love here, which is Stephen King, and the imprint that he left because of his work with Stephen King. Specifically, I want to talk about Stand By Me. And the reason why I want to talk about Stand By Me is in thinking about Rob Reiner. Um, Prior to the release of Stand By Me, Stephen King was known as the horror guy. The movies that had preceded Stand By Me were Carrie by Brian De Palma, Salem's Lot, the TV miniseries, The Shining um, by Stanley Kubrick, famously disliked by Stephen King. The collaboration between Stephen King and George Romero with Creepshow. Louis Teague's Cujo, fun movie. Uh, David Cronenberg, I always forget that it's a David Cronenberg movie, but The Dead Zone with Christopher Walken, with one of the greatest line readings of all time. John Carpenter's Christine, Children of the Corn, Firestarter. Louis Teague returns to the Stephen King world for Cat's Eye, the anthology that really doesn't get talked about too much. And part of that was my fault. I didn't talk about that too much. I revisited it a few years ago for the first time. Not revisited, visited it for the first time a few years ago and really, really enjoying it. That's a fun one. Stephen King's legendary turn behind the director's chair with Maximum Overdrive. Again, a fun sit. So there's 12 movies that took place between the years 1976 and 1986. So he had 10 years of becoming this pop cultural phenomenon, who was known as, like I said, the horror guy, the modern face of horror. And he was um, selling millions of copies of paperback books, and these were being and hardcover books, and they were being translated into very accessible, widely seen, widely talked about pop cultural movies. Carrie became an instant classic. The imagery within Salem's Lot became an instant classic. The Shining is one of the greatest movies ever made. Creepshow has, become a favorite. Cujo, that idea of a rabid dog, it sank its teeth in pop culture. Christine, the idea of this killer car is a fun one. Children of the Corn, every time you see a creepy kid now, you people will say, "Oh, Children of the Corn." Firestarter, starring Drew Barrymore, that was a big noteworthy deal for her. Oh, I missed Silver Bullet in there. Silver Bullet is another one that isn't a great movie by any means, but fun and less seen than the others. But I say all of this because, like I said, he has, along with those that adapted his works, established him and his name as the horror guy. Then in 1986, Rob Reiner comes and he does something completely different. He takes Stephen King's novella, The Body, and turns it into a staple of the 1980s. And anyone coming of age in the 1980s or the 1990s, or anyone who had been of the age of the boys during the time period in which it was set in the 1950s, this became a truly beloved movie that really showed audiences and challenged their expectations of what a Stephen King story could be. Now, clearly, anyone that reads Stephen King knows that at the heart of each one of these stories, which is horror based, there is a very strong beating heart of characters that you care about. So when Stephen King just removes all of the horror, it's very identifiable for fans of Stephen King that it is still a Stephen King story because that is his bread and butter and that's what he's good at. But um, for general audiences, this was a wake up call. It was a turn for someone that wasn't um, known to have this caring quality, this earnestness or idealism or ability to maybe just tell a very simple story. And without Rob Reiner, I don't know if Stephen King would be as beloved or celebrated in the way that he is today, because I think that this supercharges our perceptions of Stephen King. Because think about this, the prior movie to Stand By Me is Maximum Overdrive, which is not a good movie. And that movie, if there is no Stand By Me, which is then followed by Creepshow, The Running Man, if we get this string of films, Cat's Eye, Silver Bullet, Maximum Overdrive, Creepshow 2, and The Running Man, I think that Stephen King may stay stuck in a schlocky territory, and the perception would be that he is a schlocky storyteller. But by having Rob Reiner come in and provide this story, this wonderful, simple story that Stephen King is so good at telling, of children taking that next step together, saying goodbye to their childhood as they set out on a journey, both physically and metaphorically. You know, something that he's so good at it. But if Rob Reiner had not delivered this to mass audiences, I don't know if we're getting anything like The Shawshank Redemption. Because what Rob Reiner does is he proves that there is that there's an audience for this, that the IP of Stephen King, though this is not marketed as Stephen King, it certainly helps in conversation. The fact that it is written by Stephen King or adapted by Stephen King, it makes you go, what, huh? The horror guy? And it just makes it a little bit more nuanced and adds texture to this adaptation and the conversation. And like I said, really does something special, and I believe changes the course of what we perceive Stephen King to be.
So I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that. I'm not going to talk about the tragedy itself, but I just wanted to take this opportunity to acknowledge the impact that Rob Reiner had on the career and our cultural perception of Stephen King. And to continue to honor Rob Reiner, here is a re-release of my review of Rob Reiner's Stand By Me. Enjoy, everybody. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Stephen King Cast, one man's musings on the works of Stephen King. Each week, I will review one entry in the bibliography of Stephen King in the chronological order of publication. This week, I turned my attention to the movies, specifically 1986's classic coming-of-age tale Stand By Me, based on the novella The Body, found within the collection Different Seasons.
Now, Different Seasons was published in 1982, and from its pages, 3 movies were adapted. 2 of these 3 adaptations are considered classics, and not just classics, but good films, capital G, capital F. These adaptations, of course, are The Shawshank Redemption and Stand By Me. Now let's look at 1986, the time of the movie's release. Let's look at the year and see if we can contextualize what Stephen King means to the world at this point. By the end of the year, he will have published 22 books. Of those 22 books, 11 have been adapted. This is Stephen King firmly entrenched as a pop culture icon, a tour de force, if you will. So Stephen King is a phenomenon, the brand, the most popular author of his time. He's making reading fun for all ages and is known by this point as the master of horror. And then Rob Reiner released Stand By Me. And the image that the general audience had of Stephen King, that of the lurking monster who gnawed on the bones of children, was instantly challenged. Because how could Stephen King, the man responsible for the image of the blood-drenched Carrie White, the alcoholic abusive father in The Shining, who killed off half the human race in The Stand, who killed that boy in Cujo, how could that man be responsible for this elegant discovery of self in this universally beloved coming-of-age tale? Surely there has to be some mistake. At this time, Stand By Me holds a 95% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, and an 8.1 out of 10 on IMDb. And anecdotally, I've never met anyone who dislikes this movie. And many people I know, King and non-King fans alike, absolutely love this movie. I think that Stand By Me did wonders for Stephen King's image. You know, it bucked his image of the master of horror and demonstrated that his talents weren't relegated to cemeteries and haunted houses. As I've stated on multiple occasions, one of King's strengths is his ability to create a sense of authenticity in his works. And that authenticity isn't bound to any one genre. See, this coming-of-age tale is something that has been done to death at this point, right? I feel like every coming-of-age story that was released post-Stand By Me, intentionally or unintentionally, has mimicked elements from this movie, which ultimately comes from, the body, the Stand By Me adaptation. For whatever reason, when I was watching Stand By Me, I was thinking a lot of Super 8 by J.J. Abrams, which came out a couple years ago, and that movie was meant to invoke the Amblin Entertainment movies, of the 80s, your movies like, The Goonies, right? But as I was watching Stand By Me, I just kept thinking about Super 8. I just feel like even though J.J. Abrams was going for the production of the production company Amblin Entertainment, I feel like intentionally or unintentionally he was drawing a lot from what was done here in Stand By Me, and I just feel like the coming of age tale has become a popularized genre. I think it's something that film directors and writers can go to. Because I think that there's something about this particular story that speaks to us. We want to be able to look back on our own past. We want to hear what someone has to say about childhood. At the time that this came out, Stephen King was speaking of the time when he was a child, right? So it had that nostalgic lens that was very personal to him. Now we see a lot of coming-of-age tales set in the 80s or even the 90s, right? But it's something that I think speaks to a lot of people. So going back to contextualizing Stephen King at this point in time, right? This this movie comes out at the height of Stephen King, like I said, being a phenomenon and a pop culture tour de force. And while it simultaneously showed the world that he can do more than horror, I think that it's also very interesting to note that the year that it was released in the year that he published what I probably would say is his purest form of horror, mixed with everything that's included within Stand By Me. Because in 1986, not only did this movie come out, but a novel came out that I think took Stand By Me and showed that Stand By Me was really just a rough draft for the novel that I'm talking about here, and that novel is It. I think that everything that is included in Stand By Me is found within It, and it's expanded upon and it's explored deeper. And I just find it fascinating that 1986 coincided this intersection of his career, where he published it, which is his distillation of all of his tropes and musings and everything he has to say about the horror genre and everything he has to say about childhood. So everything that he had worked on from this point comes to a head in it, and it's just like he explodes in this year, and his potential just knows no bounds. I mean, we thought up until this point that he couldn't do anymore, that he almost done it all, and no one would be surprised or blame him if he just kind of started coasting or resting on his laurels. But the exact opposite happened. He challenged himself. And this year was the year to show that he could do so much, that he could be responsible for a coming of age tale that is free of supernatural elements, while at the same time telling another coming of age tale that is loaded with supernatural elements, and whose supernatural elements somehow make the coming of age that much more special and that much more real, despite the unreality of it. So 1986 was a huge year for Stephen King, and I find I'm getting a little bit off track here talking about 86, but and of course I'm going to spend a lot of time when it comes out during that particular episode, whenever I get there, and who knows at this point when that will be. But when that time comes, I will definitely talk. Every thought that I've ever had about it will come out during that podcast. In the meantime, let's focus on what Rob Reiner did here for Stand By Me. So let's look at it. From the very beginning, it establishes itself as something separate from his other adaptations. I think that, and it's presented with an elegance that I haven't seen before yet. Right away, the film is silent. It's silent. You don't hear a thing. The screen is black, and there's no fanfare, there's no effects, there's no score when the title comes up. It's all there. Everything that's there is just what needs to be there. Stand By Me, white letters, black backdrop. Rob Reiner knows what he has on his hands. All right, he doesn't need to hook you this way. He knows that the stories and the characters are going to hook you. And when this happened, I just kept thinking about movies today and how much special effects go into the credits themselves. It's really excessive at this point, and it's contrasted against what Rob Reiner did. And like I said, there's a lot of elegance to it. Now, it fades out of black, and we immediately meet Richard Dreyfuss, who's sitting in his truck among the tall grass. And then what had been silent before starts to change. The gentle score kicks in. An instrumental version of Benny King's Stand By Me. Richard Dreyfuss he's sitting uncomfortably. All right, no words are spoken, but it is clear that he's wrestling with something. And the newspaper beside him, reveals that an attorney has been stabbed to death. Now, we infer that he's affected by the news, but yet at this time we don't know why. And we're less than a minute in, but Rob Reiner has already hooked us. All right, the information, if we've read the book, blah, blah, blah. I mean, we know what's going to happen, and the same information is included in the novella. But it happens at the end, right? Chris's death is something that doesn't come about, the information doesn't come about to us until the end of the novella. But by placing it in the front, it engages the audience for a deeper experience. And we are compelled to continue to follow the story in order to find out why this happened, why this matters, who this character is, why is he sitting in this truck, why is he affected by this newspaper. It's a very effective choice on the part of Rob Reiner. And what Rob Reiner was able to do right away, okay, with Richard Dreyfuss sitting there, he's able to establish the tone. All right, there is a beauty to this movie, and I was just, talking to my wife about it. I said, the other day, I said I watched, Stand By Me. We talked about it a little bit, and, I said that I hadn't seen it in a long time. And the first thing, I thought that, okay, so actually, I'm going to back up. I was actually kind of pushing off watching this movie for the review, because this is actually the last of the different seasons reviews that I'm doing, right? And having read Shawshank, having read Apt Pupil, having read the body, and watching Stand By Me, I was not looking forward to actually reading the body, because I just felt like it has been so entrenched in our pop culture, and I had seen it. I don't want to say so many times, but it's definitely something I've seen multiple occasions. Wouldn't. I thought that it would just be cliched, and I thought that it would be cheesy. And I think that there are times when it is a little not cheesy in a sense of like poor quality, but there's definitely times I think that's cheesy in terms of feel goodery. Uh, but it's beautiful. I mean, Stand By Me is a classic, and I think that deserves that title, classic, because it is an incredible piece of film that is done wonderfully. And part of that has to do with the location, and not just location, but how Rob Reiner is able to film that location. It's incredible. It is a beautiful looking movie. There is a beauty to this landscape. And going back to the tone, which is so important. The tone, if he didn't nail this tone, that the movie would be whatever. Who cares? I think there's been a lot of imitators and copycats since Stand By Me, but Stand By Me is Stand By Me because of the, I've used this word to death, but the authenticity of it, and that authenticity comes from the tone of it, and that's captured right away with the landscape, right, and this character here just lost in his thoughts, and that combined with the score, which is nostalgic. All right, and it's perfect. It's perfect. Now, keep in mind that the movie's released in 1986, and Stand By Me came out in 1961. All right, the simple inclusion of the song invokes the feelings of looking back into the past that the character is feeling at that moment. All right, it's a brilliant decision on Rob Reiner's part, not just to retitle the story, but to build it around the song, because it harkens back to that character's own past. And then we have our own connotations and our own memories with that song, and we are able to go back into the past with him. And Stand By Me, of course, like the title just means everything to the story itself. To be perfectly honest, if they had stuck with the title "The Body," I think that it would have left us feeling a little bit cold, right? Because it does. Yes, they have to go to the body, and at the end, the reveal is that Chris is dead, and he is also the body, and we mourn for Chris, but life goes on, and there is that certainly, but "Stand By Me" is definitely more heartwarming, and I think that was definitely a good choice on Rob Reiner's part. And while sitting in the truck, Richard Dreyfuss's truck, two boys ride by, right? And that might as well just be the ghosts of his past riding by. And we flash back to his past, to Castle Rock. Now a place within Oregon, not Maine, but doesn't matter. I mean, it's just the town is beautiful, and I think that in order for the story to work, we have to find a certain beauty in childhood. We need to be able to look past and see it for everything that it is. And right now for the boys, they're on this cusp of adulthood. So adulthood is frightening, and it needs to have some menace to it, and that's definitely manifested itself. But at the same time, it also still needs to have that innocence of childhood, and I think that the innocence of childhood is recreated through just the landscapes of this town, and the fields and the trees and the rivers, everything. It's just like I've said. I'm going to say it again. This is a beautiful, beautiful movie to look at. We are introduced to the treehouse right away, and it's the I had talked about horns, and the horns had the treehouse of the mind, and this is almost like the treehouse of the mind. This is just kind of the pure version of what you think a treehouse would be. It looks like that. If you close your eyes and picture the perfect childhood treehouse, that's what it looks like, and we see it, and we meet the boys, and they're all perfectly captured by their respective actors. We have Will Wheaton as Gordon. We have Corey Feldman as Teddy. We have Jerry O'Connell as Vern, and most famously, of course, is River Phoenix as Chris. The story just progresses, just like Stephen King's did. Vern relates how he heard about the body from his brother while hiding under the porch, and Reiner includes little touches that keep it light, from Vern wiping his face, from the dust, that comes down, and there's these great camera shots. Like there's one where Vern is looking through the lattice porch, the porch lattice, and it's just the way that the camera is framed, like a little diagonal. It's great, and then later on there's Chris and Gordy's reaction, when the gun goes off, a surprise they are. It's just great. It's great. He's able to balance the whimsy of the story, with the more serious elements. And then the boys, they make the plan to head out for the body, and we're given the thrust of Gordy's issues at home and how he's constantly forced to live under the shadow of his brother, who, look, in a brilliant casting move, is played by John Cusack. From a metatextual level, this is a casting decision that, in retrospect, works wonders. Who better to throw a shadow on Gordy than the guy of the 1980s, John Cusack himself, right? Now, at the time of this movie, John Cusack wasn't John Cusack. He had made Better Off Dead, right? But I think that it was probably Say Anything that really cemented him, as John Cusack. But still, looking back now, this movie is very much an 80s movie, even though it is set in the 60s. But, for everyone that grew up in the 80s, it's definitively a part of our own childhoods because of it. And it's just, I think that it's great casting. It just works to have John Cusack play Denny. Now, there's a difference here between movie Denny and novella Denny. And the movie Denny is closer to Gordy in the story than he is in the novella. Looking out for him and being proud of his stories. In King's story, he was close, but he wasn't even close. I mean, he was in his life. But at one point, Gordy makes the point of saying that an actor could have died. And basically he equated the fact that the actor's death wouldn't necessarily have affected him the same way, but I don't think he was close to Denny, which makes it it's a different flavor, right? It's a different flavor of loss. But anyway, there's John Cusack, great casting choice, and just as brilliant as the casting of John Cusack is Kiefer Sutherland, right, as Ace Merrill. Now, Sutherland, look, whose sharp features and black-clad clothes are, at the time, assumed to make him a star with The Lost Boys, which comes out in 1987, and it's his next movie. He is a malevolent force of harm in this movie. It's great. And then, just so you know, Ace Merrill returns in the Stephen King universe in Needful Things. And when I go back to reread that for the Kingcast, I wonder if I'm going to picture, an older Kiefer Sutherland in my head. Now, just as he did with the opening, Reiner makes a slight change to the narrative, introducing Ace earlier than King had. Because in the novella, we don't see Ace until the very end of the story, whereas here, his villainy is established right up front. His bullying becomes clear and personal to the story, as he takes Gordy's hat, the same hat given by his brother. And we're also treated to the scene in which they're playing mailbox baseball, which illustrates the delinquency of the characters, but like I said, it keeps the story light. Now, there's two incredibly famous scenes from this movie, right? The train on the bridge and the leeches. And both capture everything that King had been going for, but Reiner manages to somehow out-King at his own game. The train scene in particular is filled with so much tension, the river so far below the bridge. When Gordy spots the black smoke pouring from the treetops, it's a truly, truly terrifying moment. And it's just so well done. Now, Reiner, look, he also makes a decision that I wish that King had made in the novella by removing the Chico story. In the movie, he includes the lard-ass Hogan story, and it's a fun little reprieve from the narrative. It's just a fun moment that shows Gordy's storytelling prowess. And the fact that it's presented with the story beat of a fixed boxing match, with the challenger who won't go down, makes it even more absurd. There's a huge absurdity to it, and it's hilarious. and it's a nice little filmmaking exercise. It's a little bit of a spice that just kind of makes the movie stand out. It does everything it's supposed to. It shows Vern and Teddy not really understanding storytelling, and not necessarily appreciating Gordy's talents, and it's showing the rift that will soon happen. um it's great. And the story continues. We see the moments from the text, from the howling at night, to the leeches, and the leeches, again, is an incredibly famous scene from the movie. And ultimately, they find the body, and with it, Gordy confronts his brother's death, and is talked down from the ledge by Chris. Now, in the movie, Rob Reiner makes the decision for it to be Gordy to be the one who uses the gun to push back Ace. Puts Gordy in charge. And by using the gun, we see that he's grown bolder, more confident. The scene in the beginning in which he was bullied by Ace has now come full circle, and the bully has been defeated by the victim. And he's taking that one step further into adulthood. Through narration, we learn that Chris was the one who had been murdered, as hinted in the beginning of the movie. We meet Richard Dreyfuss one last time as he finishes the story, and thusly, the movie. He joins his son and his son's friend, and through the window representing the past, we watch as he takes one more road into the distance. Again, into the future. So, this movie just works. It's just a good movie. And a lot of it has to do with Dreyfuss, who doesn't have a lot to do, but what he does is great. He does an amazing job narrating this movie. He contributes to Reiner's tone, never reading his lines with dour importance, but instead, he has a knowing playfulness. Just look at his narration during the junkyard scene in which he describes the jetted chopper. Dreyfuss is an actor that, lately hasn't done much. But he's someone between, when Jaws came out to, I'd say, What About Bob in the early 90s, was someone that was just like he was great. He was great. And then after that, I don't really know what happened. He had Mr. Holland's Opus in the early to mid 90s, and then after that, he just kind of fell off the map. But I love it whenever he shows up in something. He's incredible. And in the two scenes that he's in physically, he does so much with so little. In fact, he I think he only has like one line outside of the narration, to his kid. And so much of it has to do with just kind of looking at a typewriter, or looking at the word processor, and looking at the newspaper, but looking through the word processor, looking through the newspaper, looking into the past, looking within himself, and being able to convey a myriad of emotions. He does an incredible job. And of course, like I said, with the narration itself, he really helps contribute to tell this story, literally, but also, he serves as the heart of this story. He does a fantastic job. So now has come the time where I'm sorry. Now has come the time where I compare the book and the movie, right? So to see if there's a definitive winner. So let's go through it. Book, Vern versus movie Vern. Vern, played by Jerry O'Connell. I don't know. I mean, I don't think that there was much to Vern, the character, in the book. I mean, he serves as the plot point to get the boys out on the road. I think that King winds up taking the idea of the fat kid and infusing him with a lot more character and pathos in it. Here, I think he's played for laughs. I think that he's our comic relief. But I'm going to go, I don't know. I mean, this is kind of unfair to Stephen King, but this movie is just firmly entrenched in pop culture. right? And the characters have all gone on. It's not filled with no names. It's not like, oh, you remember that person who was in Stand By Me? They're all filled with people, right? So Jerry O'Connell is still around. He's still a presence. So I'm gonna say that Book Vern wins in the battle between book and novella. Okay, so Book Vern. Now, how about Teddy? Teddy is played famously by Corey Feldman, who was a staple of the 1980s. Now, in the novella, Teddy, I mean, Teddy is messed up, right? His ears, the image that I get of his ears is so horrific. And his ears are mangled in the movie, but I don't think to the extent as they are in the novella, which I think just the act of Teddy's father, and what he does, and that's how Stephen King shows the father's madness is unique. I mean, to hold his son's head down on the stove is truly horrifying. Um, and Teddy also in the book is so much over the top and larger than life. And I think Corey Feldman tries, and I think that Corey Feldman definitely brings the Corey Feldmanness to the role, but I can't help but think of him as Corey Feldman the entire time. It's to me it's Corey Feldman being Corey Feldman. Uh, and I'm sorry, nothing against him. I mean, he's still a young actor, and he's still super convincing. But there's times as I watched him, I'm like, he doesn't know what to do with his body during a particular scene. He just he didn't necessarily look comfortable in his body with gesticulations and being able to stand, and which is just part of being a child actor, and part of it probably has to do with him at that particular age as he was growing. But it was just something that I definitely noticed. Um, so I'm gonna go actually with Teddy from the book on this one. So 1 point book, 1 point movie. I'm gonna talk about Ace now. So we have Ace Merrill. Um, Ace from the book, who is barely a presence, right? He comes in at the end. The dread of Ace is able to build because we never really meet him, but then he does show up at the end. Then we have Ace throughout this, and again, I think that the movie is helped by what Kiefer Sutherland has gone on to do. I mean, this is Jack Bauer here, right? And Jack Bauer was a punk when he was a kid. Um, and I don't know. I just like the fact that he isn't. He's mean. He's vicious. He's dangerous. But he's not. But he's still a kid, right? I mean, he still gets off on doing stuff like, the just baseball mailboxing. And the fact that he wants to see a body as badly as the kids shows how much like a kid he is too. And just, I just the look of Keith Sutherland, his I don't know, he just looks like a wolf. He looks like a coyote. He looks dangerous, and he just looks so much bigger than the rest of the kids. I'm gonna go with Kiefer Sutherland as Ace Merrill on this, even though book Ace Merrill has the advantage of appearing in other Stephen King novels. I'm gonna go with movie Ace Merrill. So that's 2 for Rob Reiner, 1 for Stephen King. Let's talk about some of the scenes from the book. The train scene. Um, Train scene is great in the novella, but I'm telling you, like I said, I think that he kind of outdoes it. He conveys everything that Rob Reiner conveys everything that Stephen King is meant to convey, and does convey, but he just does it so just economically, I guess is the word. From showing them walking slowly across the bridge, right, and seeing the river below the slats, and then Vern falling and watching the glasses fall, and Gordy helping him up and touching the rail and feeling the vibration and turning, and you don't see anything at first, and then you see the black smoke pluming above the green treetops, and it's just so tense. It's done so well, and I have to go with the movie on that. Um, as well as the leeches. So gross to actually look at. So I'm gonna go with the movie on that. Um, Back to the discovery of the body. All right, let's talk about that because I do want to get to Gordy and Chris. Um, discovery of the body. It's a big moment, but I think that Stephen King is able to write it a little bit better. The description of the body, Stephen King makes it seem like a body. It's a body, whereas this doesn't seem like a body. You know, I mean, it's called the novella is called The Body. It's not called The Dead Person, right? Because it's not a person anymore. It's a body. It's a thing. And the novella is able to capture that it has ceased to be a person. Whereas it's clearly an actor that's pretending to be dead, and it can't convey the same sensation. So Stephen King, he gets that one. All right. Now I want to talk about let's talk about Gordy. Okay. So we have Will Wheaton. Will Wheaton, famous for this and for Star Trek: The Next Generation. I think he does a great job. I don't know. This one's tough. I think between young Gordy from the book and young Gordy from the movie, I need to go with the book. I don't know why exactly, and it's close. But I'm gonna go with the book or the novella on this one, just because we have the benefit of just getting into his mind with him being the narrator. Although I do want to take points off because he did write the Chico story. But I'm just gonna go with the book. But narrator is gonna go to Richard Dreyfuss, because Dreyfuss just knocks it out of the ballpark. Which leaves us to Chris. We got River Phoenix and we have Chris from the book. And River Phoenix, this is like considered, his movie, right? This is the movie that everyone talks about when they, and actually to kind of back it up, if you don't know who River Phoenix was, he was an up and coming young actor, and he seemed to have just the world ahead of him. He was going to be the next, not even the next big thing, but he was poised to be a lifelong superstar. I guess probably what Leonardo DiCaprio is. That's what River Phoenix's trajectory was going to be, right? Someone with serious talent that would be around for decades and decades and decades. And he had an intensity to him. And, his life was cut down short, right? Which, kind of rolls into the Stand By Me experience, right? It's hard to watch Stand By Me and watch Chris without thinking of River Phoenix and what happens to River Phoenix. So you watch it, and it's about the death of this particular character played by an actor who famously died. And there's a loss there. So it in an unintentional way, and in a very tragic way, it works. And I don't know, maybe controversially, with all that said, I'm going to go with the novella, because I just feel as though there's something about the book version of Chris that's just a slightly more tragic. You get his life more than you do in the movie, and the hard work that he puts forth when he starts studying for the classes, and that isn't as conveyed as clearly in the movie. And I think that Stephen King has the edge on that one. Although it's hard to that's a hard one to actually give to the book because of everything I said about River Phoenix. But ultimately, between Stand By Me and The Body, I gotta go with Stand By Me. I think that this movie does so much for Stephen King's career. in a way that the body didn't. Now, the body, of course, inspired the book, or inspired the movie. So Rob Reiner, owes everything to Stephen King, but in turn, it's very mutual. Um, I think that Rob Reiner before this had done this as Spinal Tap, um, which is great, great movie. But I think that this, more than anything else, allowed Rob Reiner to distance his All in the Family meathead persona, and people were all of a sudden opened their eyes and said, "Oh my God, this guy has talent." And when he did that with Stand By Me, he was able to do the same thing for Stephen King. And he was able to have people open their eyes and say, "Oh my God, so Stephen King doesn't just write about uh, blood-drenched prom queens and alcoholic fathers that want to kill their sons with axes, and vampires that take over towns, and girls that light things, on fire with their minds, and rabbits Saint Bernards. There's someone that actually has a heart." So with this movie, he was able to show the world what I've been saying about Stephen King, and that's how he is a very optimistic writer that believes in humanity and is able to capture the truth of humanity, and being able to capture certain moments that matter. This particular moment being that point in our lives when we leave childhood behind and head into adulthood. So that's that's my feeling on Stand By Me, and I don't know. I don't know if people out there agree or if they feel as though the body is better, but definitely write in to let me know your feelings at stephenkingcast@yahoo.com. And you can like us on Facebook or Instagram or Tumblr or Twitter. And if you have any time, feel free to go over to iTunes and write a review, because the more iTunes reviews, the kind of more the podcast itself will spread. So everyone that's been listening, thank you so much. Thank you for listening this week, and stay tuned next week
as I dive into Stephen King's kind of coming of age, but it's a novel that all of us in one way or another can relate to. And that's about the love that we have for our first car, our first love, our first car. And that, of course, is 1983's Christine. So stay tuned as I dive into that one. This is me, again, talking from 2026. I always try to keep the focus of this podcast on Stephen King's works. But I do have to say that the review of Christine is one of the things that I'm most proudest of this podcast. I love that episode. I loved talking about that episode, or the events that led into that episode, and that relationship between a person and their first car, and the love and the possibility that comes from that is it was really special for me to be able to explore that through this podcast. So I'm excited to get back to that. All right, everyone, you can follow me on Instagram, on Facebook, on TikTok, and on Blue Sky. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts. And if you have any time and want to share some thoughts, please write into stephenkingcast@yahoo.com. And may you have long days and pleasant nights, everyone. And I will see you here next week, where MOON spells Stephen King Cast.